All right, welcome to Building the Athlete. I'm your host, Scott Benson. Today with me is Dan Quesenberry. Dan, we're going to get right into it. Not even going to let you introduce yourself, just going to ask you a question right away.
Okay.
So, front side mechanics or backside push?
That's a great question, which we'll get into the talk. Being more in sports team performance, not track specific, we don't over stress. Obviously, we teach mechanics, we use speed drills more in how we prep the athletes. Yeah, I think it's both. I think we think more push on our acceleration, but we definitely want to get and keep that front side mechanics, if you will. I think it's a little different maybe if we're speaking track, which I don't work with track athletes, primarily football. So,
Okay, good
uh,
answer. Just got to get you warmed up. So,
yeah,
Dan, thanks for joining
like
us
this.
today. Why don't you tell us, where you're from, what you're doing, and I guess how'd you get to where you're at today?
All right. Try to keep this kind of short, but I'm originally from Northern West Virginia. I'm a mountaineer at heart. Grew up, I'm in traditional big three sports, football, basketball, baseball. Always loved the training and preparation aspect of it. Even as a kid, I got into weight training probably around, we still called it junior high at the time instead of middle school. We had the standards seventh, eighth, ninth grade. High school was your 10 through 12, which a lot of people my age are probably more used to. But then I just, again, loved, and we're talking at that time, I graduated high school in 1992, so I'll be 52 this year. So strength training still, football became big because of Nebraska and the bigger, faster, stronger. So going into college, I really wanted to go into coaching. Football was always my passion. So I went through the physical education teaching path, and that's what got me into starting out coaching high school football. And again, just like growing up playing sports, I fell in love with the off season, the in season training, and the preparation aspect of it. So I spent majority of my early part of my career teaching and coaching high school football, but I would always had, my hands in on the training side of it, but not necessarily, certified or had all the experience like a lot of sport coaches. We do what we thought was best. A lot of times our training went back to how maybe we trained growing up. Uh, and then later on, back in probably around the, I don't know what you call it, the 2010s. So about 15, 16 years ago, I started to get a lot more into diving into sports performance training, specifically strength training and how we could make that better, with our football teams. And then that kind of led me to having my own kids growing up. My son was at that age where he was going to start playing football, that I didn't want to be the absent dad coach. I wanted to be more involved. So I got more into just training athletes and then being able to help coach his teams and be more a part of his sport journey. And then fast forward, did that for about 7, 8 years, worked a lot in the private sector and training athletes. Again, very strength emphasis. And then 2021, a guy I coach with at the high school I'm currently at, I was there back in 2013, 14, 15. I came back in 2021, but strictly as the strength and speed coach. And this will be now 5 years. And that kind of puts us up at the current date.
Okay. So when did you said about 5, 6, 7 years ago is kind of when you started to transition from just the weight room mentality to a speed based focus? Kind of explain what got you moving in that direction.
Right. So I think a lot of us, like coaches, when you're on social media, you find, different coaches or, teams you follow and people you start to respect. And, you go down these different rabbit holes, you see what they're doing. And that's when I first came across Tony Holler and Feed the Cats, was around that 2021, early 2022, and went to his coach tubes, took some of those, and everything he said just made sense. So I came from that old school mentality. Like I said, the way I was raised, the way I played, it was the grind mentality. It was, we're going to work so hard. It makes the game easy. The summer, the conditioning, everything we did was, very Navy SEAL military type training, and everything he said just made more sense. It's like we all talk about, we want these fast, explosive, powerful athletes, but are we actually training those type of athletes, right? Sometimes we're blessed with those kind of players, but the old saying is, are you displaying athleticism or are you actually developing it? And that really kind of hit home with me that, we can develop this and we can take, some of your average athletes and make them better athletes. We can take our better athletes and make them elite athletes. And that's when we kind of transitioned from the old school conditioning mentality to truly developing speed, and even carried over to the way we trained in the weight room and making sure everything was more from an athletic standpoint and building that explosiveness, power, and doing it in a more logical sense from a volume standpoint, right? Of having fresh, healthy athletes as much as anything. And that's when we started to make the transition. And like anything, you try to microdose, do a little bit here and there. But if you work in this team setting, it doesn't really matter what I do if the coaches don't believe it. So I had to, study it, put the time in, and convince the coaches that this is the philosophy and the track we want to go. And so the way we did it, the current school I'm at, was the spring of 23. So we're only talking 3 years ago. It's still pretty new. I told the coach what I wanted to do, what it looked like, the benefits of it, everything I've been learning. And he said, well, this is the perfect time. It's spring ball. Let's give it a go. And we started with the max V training on a Monday, acceleration on Wednesday. And what the coaches noticed was it's kind of like in the strength world, how when we do something explosive, we recruit motor units and it potentiates your strength. They felt like the speed work kind of worked as that potentiator for practice. It lit up the guys' central nervous systems. It made the position coaches felt like the players were more locked in, ready. Their skill acquisition was higher. Instead of going through the same mundane dynamic warm-ups and starting practice very slow, started practice very fast, very explosive. And then I started transitioning the way we trained in the weight room too. But that really was kind of the spark that led us into that first summer and off season. And what we noticed was we were lucky. We were already using GPS units at the time. We didn't have a lot, but we were catapulting, and we started to do the record, rank, publish of sprints. We had about 10 guys that could hit 20 miles per hour, which, is decent speed. But then this past fall, going into our 2025 season, we have 54 players over 20 miles per hour. And we have 118 varsity players. And then that doesn't count the 58 freshmen. That's a whole other group. But 54 of our 118 varsity players are now over 20 miles per hour after 3 full seasons of the sprint-based approach.
Ready to be part of something big? Meet the Rapid City Sports Commission, the powerhouse behind sports in Rapid City. The commission focuses on bringing regional and national tournaments, supporting homegrown events, and creating opportunities for our kids. But it's not just games, it's a win-win for all of us. Youth sports fuel our economy. Hosting events in Rapid City means out-of-town families shop, dine, and stay with us, which boosts sales tax revenues too. To get in on the action, visit rcsportscommission.com, where we're all about the hustle.
Okay. You mentioned potentiation and recruitment, and I don't think a lot of parents and athletes probably even understand when we talk about recruiting type 2 muscle fibers. And there's only a certain amount of ways to do that. And sprinting is obviously number one,
right?
Plyometrics, and then heavy lifts. So my whole program is based off of that. When we talk about a sprint based program, and let's just say you've got, like you said, 2 sprint days a week. In those days when we're training speed, what percentage of it do you think is activation and recruitment as opposed to technical increases?
I think it just happens like anything over time. I mean, speed's truly like growing a tree, right? You just need to, it's the old saying, the difference between poison and medicine is the dosage. So that microdosing of the speed, and 2 times a week we do consistently through spring, summer, in season. But right now, like winter, we do 3 days. We do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And now, with that said, it's speed focused, but we still have to train them as athletes too, right? So different from track is I still have to train an athlete how to decelerate, how to change direction. So we use a lot of the Tony Villani game speed stuff as well. So our focus is still, build the, raise the ceiling, raise the floor, get their max V high. But a lot of our emphasis is on the acceleration again, because that one step of separation is huge in sports. So that's why, back to even like the speed drills, the technical side of it, we're working that, toe up, knee up, like you said, the front side mechanics, or trying to get the good body angles, body shapes on our acceleration. Again, you're working with like 118 athletes. So trying to do that, be very intentional, everything we do in training now, switching to this approach, is everything's a performance base. So we don't want anything, done in that, 5, 6 out of 10. We want to be at an 11. And that's how we tell our athletes, we're not going to do a lot, but we're going to do it at a high intensity to get better each time.
Yeah. How is your, and maybe I don't know how many football coaches you've implemented with this style of training with, but I kind of laugh because I probably had my most difficult, creating relationships with football coaches. They're
Right.
set in their way, they're still pushing Husker power,
Oh, yeah.
from 35 years ago. I had a football coach one time say, I don't want my kids working with Benson. He was a track guy. Well, exactly. That's exactly who you want your people working with, because
Right.
everything's going to be based on speed, explosive power, force production. And so have you had any resistance to it, or have you had good luck implementing that with football programs?
I think that's one area where I differ from a lot of people if they are just a sports performance coach first, is I was the football coach first, right? And I was in high school football for over 15 years in this area. So I've built a lot of relationship with coaches. They know me and they know I've done it their way. And so when they see me transition to a different way and the success our team is having and just the product on the field, like the number of coaches after a game say your guys just look different. They move different. And it's like every coach can relate to, the film doesn't lie, and speed is speed. And when you increase that team speed and the guys fly around, and then with our approach, like I said, they're healthy. They're basically like caged up animals on Friday nights. It's like you turn the lights on, they're ready to go. And we can go through my schedule in a little bit of how we taper the week. But our work to game volume is practice volume's less than 50%, typically 40, 45%. And again, we track all that now with our GPS units. So I think it's well respected in that area. And then with my own teams, it's a relationship with the coach. So the coach who I started this with, we coached at a rival high school for 4 years back in 2009 through 2012. And then we went to the high school I'm at now. We were together 13 through 15. And then he went to a new school. Then he went down to Alabama for a few years. He kind of jumps around a lot, but he came back in 21 and brought me with him. And he wanted me to coach at the same time. So we were going to be back like we were, where I'd be coaching and training, but I just wanted to do all the sports performance training. So he trusts what I do. He knows I'm passionate about it. I study it. It's like having a conversation with you right now. I'll learn things from you and then, follow your information, or it's, being that lifelong learner. He knows I'm not going to try to do anything that's not going to make our athletes better, which in direct makes the team better. So I think that's the biggest thing. Now, we can be frank here. Like I've talked to other coaches, even at our school, and they don't agree with this mindset, right? So I'm only going to work with teams or athletes that believe in it, because if you know how it is in training, if you do everything right, but the sport coach is running them in the ground, it's just going to contradict each other. And the flip side, there's people in the weight room that ruins the athletes, and it affects the type of athlete they have on the field. So it's got to be a collaboration. It's got to be in sync. If it's supposed to be a high day at practice, and that's what it is. But more importantly, if it's a low day, we need a low day. And that low day's got to reflect the same in the training as well, or we're just going to have overworked, fatigued kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you hear the phrase a lot, game speed versus track speed, or football speed versus track speed. Tell me, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think it goes back to that one step of separation we talked about, being able to create it. So you can be really fast, because you can take a high level track athlete. It doesn't mean they're a very good football player or basketball player. And same thing, you can have a great football, basketball athlete, but they may not be a great track athlete, right? So we're trying to increase the speed, but they do have to know how to control it. So that goes back to being able to decelerate and change direction and create that one step. One of the coolest things I've ever seen Tony Villani do, and you can find this if you haven't, have you ever seen his one step of separation?
I have
Where he'll
not.
take like a tight end, like a NFL pro level tight end that runs, I don't know, it's a 4.7 or 4.8. And then he takes this little fast DB that runs like a 4.3. And he puts them exactly 1 yard apart, right? He has the tight end's heel on the 1 yard line and the DB's front foot on the goal line. And he has all the other players he's training. This is how he creates buy-in. And he says, go stand where you think how far it'll take for him to catch him. And most of the guys will go stand anywhere from 7, 8, maybe 10 yards at the most. And I kid you not, to create that to overcome that one step of separation, it's always over like 30 yards, even at a 4.7 to 4.3. And it shows that how important to be able to create that separation is, because, like anyone fast, if they get outside and they have that separation and they run 22 miles per hour, you're not going to catch them. But you have to be able to do that sometimes in a tight space, moving in a different direction, whatever it may be. So we do a lot, even with our fly 10s and timed runs, sport specific. We'll do roll 90s, we'll do 180s, we'll work it out of 45-degree cuts, 135, and we'll still set up 5-yard run in and then have the 10-yard flies based on that angled cut, to where they got to learn now how to use the speed. So we're always still going to build that max speed. But once we get guys running in the upper 21s or 22s, controlling is more important than the kid that can only run 18. The kid running 18, we need to get that kid faster. And I do believe everything Tony Holler says about it is global, tide that lifts all boats. It does help your acceleration. It does help your change of direction, but you still have to, like anything, do it, right? Just like people want to argue certain parts of, the weight room can help your speed or this. But what I noticed when we were strength first mentality and then speed, we didn't necessarily get as fast. But when we were more speed first priority, we got stronger, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah. Do you think, so you say when you were speed based first that you got stronger? Do you think that's because of, kids are getting maximum recruitment from the speed training, which then carries over to the weight room and allows them to be more explosive into a bar, which then allows them to move more weight? Do you kind of relate those together?
I do. And I will say too, it can't, I really do think they're married. It can't be one without the other. I mean, I think anyone, yourself in track, knows that the strength matters too, right? Because a weak athlete,
Absolutely.
they can't create a lot of force, right? Or, they have weak ankles, their foot's collapsed, their body's going to self-govern, not let themselves move fast, right? But to your point, and back to you said earlier, sprinting is the most extreme thing we can do. I think the studies show there's nothing in the weight room that comes within 60% of a max effort sprint. So to your point, by doing that, and then training that central nervous system, it's more, I consider the speed more electrical, right? And that carryover is going to go over when we're in the weight room. It is more muscular because they have that ability to create more, like you said, force into the bar with their jumps, everything. And again, the jumping too, when you get into the plyometrics and the, limiting the ground contact time, all that together. And that's what I love about this type of training. Our athletes love it because it is performance based, and we're getting metrics on everything. We're measuring their speed, their verts, their broads, their standing triple. We use the VBT, so we measure the bar speed. So again, it's gamifying and creating that, I think, intention to move the bar faster, right? So all these things together, and especially with today's generation, you know how it is. They're not used to delayed gratification like we did growing up. Everything's instant. They can get on Amazon, all their social media. So now they're getting instant feedback as well. Like they know their speed right away. They know how high they jumped, how far they jumped, how fast they move the bar, or what weight they can move at a certain speed. Because, we still want to lift heavy too, right? So we're going to move it at 0.3 meters per second. But they know that, what weight can you move at 0.3? Okay, what can you move at 0.8? So, or we go peak velocity and we're doing hex bar jumps. Okay, we want to see hit 2 meters per second, whatever it may be. I think all of that, I don't think you can single one thing. I think sprinting is a priority, but it's not the majority because it doesn't take a lot of time, right? But we want to do all of it. And that's, the pillars of athleticism that we do is sprint fast, lift heavy, and lift fast. We want to do both. Jump high, jump far, be bouncy, right? And then we want to throw. So we use a lot of throwing as our in lieu of Olympic lifting. And I'm not an anti-Olympic lifter. We did it all the time with all the programs. It's just with the sheer number of volume of guys we have. And, if you know how a high school year works in different sports and not having the consistent athletes and training blocks to go through progressions, the return on the investment of time to be good at Olympic lifting, I can take them out. We can throw med balls really high, really far. We can do our loaded jumps, and I don't feel like we're missing anything in our program. And I took those out about 3 years ago when we shifted to the sprint-based approach.
Yeah, I have I have several contracts with schools and organizations, and so I know what you're talking about when you've got a room of 30 or 40 athletes. Now, and I love Olympic lifts. I'm a huge advocate for it. I think it's
Yeah.
awesome. But I 100% agree with you. One thing I will say is by using the VBT, it's allowed us, rather than having every kid put weight on and off of a bar, if we got 5 or 6 kids on a bar and now the goal is just how fast can you move it,
Right.
it definitely has made the weight room more efficient. One thing you said, and anytime I hear a coach talk about ankles, it makes me smile because I think it's one of the most overlooked areas of sports performance. And I don't care if we're talking about speed, vertical jump, change of direction. If you're weak at that joint,
Right.
you're in trouble. So I'm always happy when I talk to somebody that brings that up because I think it's very much overlooked and should be. I try to look at athletes when I first look at an athlete, I look at them from the ground up, and
Right.
that's the first thing that you see. How do you deal with, kids and coaches with football? It's been so much for so long about we got to get big in the off season. We got to get big in the off season. They want hypertrophy phases, but that doesn't really fit into the speed based model. So do you sacrifice high volume lifting to keep them fast and keep them rested, or in the off season, do you take some time away from speed focus to focus on hypertrophy?
So we're speed focused 12 months a year. So that was back when we thought we were training speed. So let's go pre 2022. We had that mentality from January till spring ball. We're going to get bigger. I can't say faster and stronger, right? Because if you're not doing speed, you can't get bigger, faster, and strong. It's like get big and strong, and then we'll come out of this and the spring ball we'll start doing speed. But even then our speed wasn't real speed work. We were running, it was too high volume, the rest intervals did not exist. It was glorified conditioning, but we called it speed training. Where if you're doing 10 sprints of 40 yards but less than 20 seconds rest, you're not speed training, right? And that's what it looked like. Or if you're doing hill sprints but they don't even get to the bottom and you're blowing the whistle to go back up the hill, well, again, you're not working anything to make him a better athlete. So there's a lot to that because let's be honest, high schoolers need a little bit of body armor, right? They're in that they're growing, but I always tell them they need to pick a fork up more than they need to pick a bar up because we'll pick the bar up enough. But what I try to do, like right now in our off season, we're 3 days a week. It's speed, plyos, throws, total body type lifts. And then on Saturday, program them that fun bodybuilding hypertrophy type lift. And it's pretty much upper body focused. They do it. We post it in the locker room. It'll be whether they have access to bar, dumbbells, a gym or not. But it's just that higher volume, like dumbbell bench, dumbbell rows, shrugs, lateral front raises, your typical bodybuilder type lift that they can throw in that makes a teenage boy feel good, right? Work on the mirror muscles, but they're back with us Monday. We're going to make you a better athlete. You want to go do the old curls for the girls, tries for the guys, have at it. And that'll give them that little volume. That's not going to affect their legs on Monday when we run. They don't need to squat or deadlift or any of that. And that's kind of how we handle it because, again, our time is limited. I'm not going to spend a block of training on doing a bunch of curls and tricep extensions. That's stuff they can do on their own. And then that's what we try to tell them. Even if they have where they want to do body weight push-ups and pull-ups routinely through the week, that's fine. I tell them they can keep 2 20, 25-pound dumbbells under their bed and do 3 or 4 sets of 10 curls every night. It will not affect their training the next day.
Yeah, you got to give a little bit of bro work to the high school boys.
Oh, yeah.
They crave that. And I do agree with you. You called it body armor, but I typically call it character building. And with a lot of my teams where I'll do workouts that really have no transfer to their sport that are extremely difficult because they build character. And from a coaching staff perspective, you want to see those guys that grind through it and don't give up, don't come over and say, "Hey coach, my hamstring's hurting," but then you see them practicing and they're just fine. So you learn a lot
Yeah.
about athletes through those workouts. I don't think you need to do them very often, but there's a time and place for them. And unfortunately, like you said initially, there's a lot of coaches that still, that's all they do.
Right.
It's the boot camp. It's the pound them into the ground. It's crawling off the quarter field puking. And there's just, that's so antiquated at this point. And unfortunately, there's a lot of coaches out there that don't understand that. So let's talk about, and you alluded to this a little bit, at my gym, we kind of alternate an acceleration and a top end speed day, or we do a little bit of both. And then we have a lateral day. So we do linear one day, lateral one day. Let's talk about the difference between acceleration, top end speed, and change of direction. How do you address that?
Yeah, so that's kind of how we do our winter with the 3 days. Is one day is more top speed, right? And it's typically Mondays, and then Wednesdays more acceleration based, and then Friday more the game speed, change of direction. But even that said, when we're doing the speed drills, we'll work things in. It may not be a change of direction day, but we may have some deceleration practice in there. We go through progressions all winter, or we start it real easy with the old typical, they're spread out, they're just jogging in place, and they work on a quick break plant. And then we break plant. Then we may progress that to jogging 5 yards and break plant. And then over time, it's more of like a little burst into a deceleration. And then we want it not to always be so controlled. It'll be on a whistle. We're going to get on our 2-point start. We're going to explode out to work on that acceleration. But then on the whistle, you got to stop on a dime and seeing who can stop quickly. So yeah, we'll mix that in, or even with I don't know if are you familiar with like Brian Kula and Kula Performance?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so he has the old bounce fire series that he uses a lot when he's training speed and athletes. And even in his bounce fire series, he has change of directions built in. So they work great if we're doing a bounce fire series warm up. And it may be we're going lateral, 3 right leg fires, stick it, left leg fires back, turn, burst, sprint 5 yards, stop. So it'll be things like that. And then we'll do the fire series going backwards. We'll always mix up going forward, backward, lateral, like you said, or, changing directions and different angles. And then we'll do it where it's not always set on a line or a distance. I like it to be reactive too. We won't start with that, but we'll progress to that. So it's not always just, set and they memorize the steps and the pattern. We want them to be able to read just like a sport, right? And make it more reactive. But our max V day is straight line, and the whole goal is to run as fast as possible, and we'll rest until they're fully fresh. We stick to typically the 1 minute for 10 yards. So, 30, we're going to give them 3 minutes. And if anything, we always err on the side of an extra minute. Typically works out. Sometimes we'll pair that with something simple. Like I know this past Monday, we were doing 2010s. They had 3 snap down vertical throws, and then they went over methodically, had a short rest, and hit their 2010, and then rested 4 minutes. And then we went through that circuit like 3 times. You're talking 9 explosive throws, 3 sprints, and that was it.
Yep. Less is more.
Yeah.
So you've alluded to it a little bit, deceleration. Let's talk about deceleration, how it applies to on-field performance. How do you use the weight room to emphasize in the eccentric phases, and then your feeling of deceleration as it applies to injuries?
So in the weight room, especially early on, we'll use a lot of the triphasic stuff, Kyle Dietz, and we'll do slow eccentrics. I usually put those in at the end of the week because all the sprint work we do. So I don't want their hamstrings completely shot like on a Monday and then affect us on the Wednesday, Friday. So if we're doing like 6-second eccentric RDLs, that'll be on a Friday. But we'll do is more as the build that strength in the eccentric. We'll do the depth drops. We'll start at a moderate height and we'll progress over time. And then we'll do things even with drops like to a split stance. So we may have 2 dumbbells and we'll get up on the toes, triple extend, and fast drops. And then we'll alternate it. Again, we'll do the same thing with the med ball throws. And then with the sprinting, like I said, with the body weight, we start at a very easy kind of march, jog, in place type pace and just learning how to drop their center of mass, kind of stick the foot, put the other foot down. We'll do that to lines and we'll alternate right foot, left foot. And then we'll build where we build a little bit of speed. Okay, maybe we're going to jog out 5 yards. Now maybe it's 10 yards. And then we'll do, back to Tony Villani, part of his game speed curriculum is they'll have your game speed 1, which is your explosive step, 1 step of force, or game speed 2, where you have the 2 steps of force. And then you mark off distances of how soon you should be able to stop. And now it's got to be based on your effort of your acceleration. So, if you take off and it's like 2 steps of force, you stop within 9 to 12 yards. So we'll mark these zones off and we'll work on that fast acceleration into a fast deceleration. And I think it's like anything, it's you're building that tolerance, right? So then when they go practice and they're going full speed, they build that strength, and then it helps. Nothing's bulletproof, but you don't have those injuries. And that's maybe a side note here, or it kind of ties in. Once we switch to this sprint-based approach, our soft tissue injuries were gone, like non-existent. We don't get the hamstrings and the groins and all that, especially when they come out for spring ball or late summer or the 7v7s, because they're exposed to these high velocities all the time. And as you know, in the game, they rarely hit 75%, which is why teams get slower in a season, because they're not hitting the max velocity in a game. And then they're practicing even slower. And then in the games when they do have to hit even close to their max velocity, that's when they're popping hamstrings and getting those soft tissue injuries. So we always, with our tracking, is we want to be within 95% every week. And that's what we do in season, that every Monday we test them. And so it's a measure of health. If someone's 22 miles per hour, I don't know the math on top of my head, it's probably like 21.3 or something, but at 95%, and then we track those guys and make sure that we're in that range. And what we found is that 95%, the needle moves as the season goes on because our guys get faster. We got a quarterback. He just graduated early. He's at Boston College. His preseason max V was 22.5, which, is a fast kid, right? Week 9 of the season, he hit 22.8 on a Monday practice in week 9. And that doesn't count the countless examples of guys that are in the 19s that get to that 20, or they're 20, now they're at 20.5. So our guys progressively get faster going into the playoffs, where most teams are probably slower weeks 2 or 3, if that, because back to your point, if they weren't even truly speed training, they were just running their guys in the ground. A lot of times they have all those injuries going on the first few weeks of camp, because now their guys are trying to hit these top speeds that their bodies have never touched.
Today's episode of Building the Athlete is brought to you by Branded Bills. If you're like me, you live in your hat, at work, on the field, in the weight room, and everywhere in between. Branded Bills makes premium, high-quality hats that actually fit right and hold up to the grind. Clean, everyday styles that are built for athletes and coaches who demand more. Check out Branded Bills and upgrade your headwear game today. There's a link in our bio for 10% off your first order. Across America, every sport. We're not talking just football, and we can even include track and field in it. What percentage of sports teams and sports coaches do you think are actually hitting speed-based workouts on a weekly basis?
Well, it depends on how we define it. If we define it how we're doing speed now, I would say less than 3%. Well, I don't know. If you throw track in there, maybe a little higher, better, but let's take track out of it for a second. I would say probably definitely less than 5%, if not less than 3%. If you throw track in there, I'd like to think more that truly works with sprinters, but as we know, that's not the case. At our school, we have an awesome speed coach, and they do. So I know our football team and track team definitely are in that small percentage, but definitely pretty low. And that's the one cool thing we haven't really got into. We're talking football, but I teach the weights classes during the day. So it's a mixed class where I can have football guys, wrestlers, baseball, tennis, swimming, you name it, golf, whatever, or just, your average student that just wants to learn about weight training. And I expose them all. Lasers up in the hall. We sprint twice a week. And my non-football athletes love it. The swimmers bought in, the golfer talks about their club speed getting better, and the swimmers, the same thing. I know another example of that, Brian Kula and Kula Performance, he trained a group of swimmers, dry training, I think they call it, whatever. But he did all the speed training, and then when they went back to the water, they broke, 40, 50 school records. Because again, it goes back to the whole central nervous system. And I've got a couple of wrestlers, same thing. You think wrestling, I don't need to be fast. It's not about that, right? It makes their first step faster. Everything they do, they're quicker from that electrical stimulus training. to where when they're not, if they leave my class or summertime, they asked me to write them simple speed workouts that they can continue on their own. That's when you know you truly have the buy-in, even if their teams aren't doing it. And then this is a story I'll tell you real quick. So we get, half dozen to 10 guys every year go on to play Division I football at all various levels. We got one that's playing in college, and he texted me back in September and said how they don't do any speed training. They've got a lot of hamstring injuries and stuff on the team. And he really wanted me to speak to their strength coach. Now, I was like, I don't know. How are you going to say that? You were telling your college strength coach, call your high school strength coach, right? But this kid was one of those, certain guys, they carry themselves really well, even if they're younger. So if anyone could convince their strength coach to give me a call, it was this guy. And he did. And their strength coach called and we talked. Probably for 2 hours, the first call. And this was the middle of their season. So he's thinking about more after season. And then he called me again after the season. And then that kid came back over the break to train at the high school. And he told me that they've changed everything and they're switching. This is the college switching to a more sprint-based approach. So I think a lot of times it's just, like doing podcasts like this and the information out there. That's how I found it with Tony Holler on Twitter. When you listen to it and you listen to someone like Tony break it down, it just makes sense. To me, it's just common sense training. And you ask any coach again, they all would agree they want a fast, explosive, powerful, whatever description athlete, but yet everything they're doing is contradictory of that. Right. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if I
Yeah, I've
spun off
had,
there a little bit on you,
I've
but
had,
yeah.
no, that's good. I've had countless athletes go to Power Four schools, big name schools, and call me and say, hey, like, we're not doing this. We're not doing this. They'll only let me squat X amount. They won't let me go above this on cleans. And, one of those kids went on and he was a fairly high draft pick for the Yankees. And he got down to spring training in Florida and guess what they're doing first day? They're doing A series, speed technical work. And he knew how to do all of it. And he destroyed all their force plate records. He caught their attention right away because he knew how to do all this stuff. And they asked him, how do you know how to do this? And he said, I've been doing this since I've been in high school. And, so the Yankees, the strength coach gave me a call and we just chatted and he's like, doesn't matter what level you're at. There are great high school strength coaches, great college, great professional, but you have to be open-minded and willing to accept the information that's out there. And like you said, does it make sense? Like I ask myself why on everything I program. Why are we doing this? At this time of the year, in season, off season, what type of athlete? Why are we doing this? Does it make sense? And athletes need to learn to ask the same question. It's okay. They're so, well, I'm at Notre Dame. Here's my sheet. I need to go do it, without any question. And I'm not telling people to be disrespectful, but I think you should understand the process for sure.
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that. What we do too is, especially high schoolers, they only know what they know, right? Like any of us. So educating them, there's always a why behind everything. What's the intent? What are we trying to accomplish? So we try to do a great job of doing that, not only with our guys, but parent meetings. So we were supposed to have a parent meeting last Saturday, but I don't know if you heard like Nashville, we got all this ice. There's still over 200,000, I can't say people, customers. So that's 200,000 families without power in the area. So we've been out of school all week. So they shut down. We didn't have the parent meeting anyway. It's going to be next Wednesday. But when we have these parent meetings, in an early off season or even then like in season, I always ask for, give me at least 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever they'll give me. And I'll speak to the parents about everything we do, why we do it, how we do it. Because then, but you probably know too, you got to fight. You're doing everything right, but they're trying to do double that, triple that. Or, we got a max speed day, but they're with their dad or at the gym the night before and they're doing 5x5 back squat at 85%. They're going to come in, they're not fresh, their legs are cooked. That's not what we programmed. We've had an off day, so we expect our athletes to be ready to go. So, a lot of that's educating the parents. And then what I always recommend parents is instead of paying for more training, we're going to give your kid quality training. Go get a food service or a sports dietitian or nutritionist and get locked in there. What are your kids, when they want to ask about supplements, what's their sleep habits like? Do they even know their macronutrients, how much protein they're getting a day? And usually right there is the biggest problem. They don't need some type of supplement right now. They need to eat real food. They need to go to bed. And then when it's time for us to train, perform at a high level. When it's not, rest and recover so you're ready to repeat that.
That is such good advice right there. And it's so overlooked where, I get kids that their parents sign them up for every possible activity, strength coach, running coach, and they're going from morning till night and all they are is tired. And
Yeah.
they're in an injury waiting to happen. And it's our mentality in this country is more is better. I want it right now instead of, quality over quantity and, the recovery, the nutrition. We could talk about nutrition for a long time. That's such an overlooked thing.
Yeah.
But we, as a whole, we do a lot of things the wrong way. And that's why I love talking to guys like you that are doing everything right. And, we just have to continue to get that message out there. So what do you see? Obviously social media is a huge influence over young athletes, but where do you see a lot of coaches that maybe have the right idea to how they should be training, but they're going about it the wrong way? Like, where do you see them getting it wrong with speed development?
I think being comfortable with how little you really have to do, right? And then also being comfortable with how long they really need to rest. Coaches aren't comfortable with players standing around. But as you know, in the weight room, it's the same thing. If you want to get stronger, you better have rest intervals to allow them to recover. They think everyone's got to be busy, everyone's got to be doing something. No, they don't. Our guys, if we're doing heavy hex bars and we're moving at that 0.3 meters per second, they'll sit down on the bench. Now we may have like a loaded jump or something paired with it, and then they'll just sit there and rest. And we'll give them plenty of time, or they're not going to be able to, push that strength level. And just like speed, when we do the in season speed training, it's a max V day and we're hitting a 30-10 fly or whatever it may be. There's going to be 4 to 5 minutes where they're standing there. And that is a hard concept for, football coaches to grasp. But it's something like, again, like I said, we're blessed. We do it right. Because if you take that out, then you're not doing it right. You know what I mean? And you got to figure, we got 118 guys. And you wonder, and people always ask, well, how do you record, rank, publish? You have 118. So we don't have 118 catapults, right? We have 48. So, do the math there. That's still, 70 guys without. So the way we set it up, we got so many guys. I'll have most varsity players in the north end zone and then the JV guys in the south end zone. So obviously I have to have some coaches help. And we start with RPR and then we go into our speed drills for the day. And then we try to hit 2 max velocities, right? The guys with the catapults will stay with me in the north end zone and we will do basically they have 40 yards to hit top speed. They'll do a slow walk back. We'll give them 4 to 5 minute rest. They'll hit a second one. But all the other guys, I set up our timing gates off on the sideline. And the guys that are in the north end zone, they'll hit their first fly 10 traveling south. And then the guys in the south end zone will hit theirs coming north. And we have the OVR sprint, so they work both ways. So if I'm running north to south, when I get down there, I'll have my full rest and then I'll hit my second rep coming back, which will put me back to where I started. And that whole process takes like 18 minutes and then they start practice. And then our coaches are good. Our practices are like 90 minutes. So on a speed day, you're talking an hour and 45 minutes. But on acceleration day, the whole thing's 90 minutes, even with the acceleration. And that's it. And then what we do is, so the fly 10s, they're getting their time. I don't have a coach sit there with a clipboard. The catapult, I'm going to pull the data, right off. We have the vector. Actually, we get live data, but I can pull all the metrics off with those guys. We get player load, acceleration, decelerations, distance traveled. And that's your main 48 guys. But the other guys, we just do simple Google form. We gave a QR code in the locker room. And let's say you hit your 30-10 and you were 1.01 or 0.98. You go in, boom, you hit it. You put your name, Scott. We even put your position group, put your time. And then I keep a log and track those guys all season as well.
So let's talk about consistency with speed training. So I fully believe, just from my own experience and my experience coaching lots and lots of athletes, I think there's about a 72-hour window before the central nervous system starts to lose recruitment, starts to forget recruitment, which means you need to have those high intensity repetitions at minimum a couple times a week. And that's why I asked you the question about, what percentage of teams do you think are doing this? And, we're talking between 3 and 5% in all sports everywhere. And so, how do we continue to educate people how important those touches are, at least a couple times a week?
Well, I think it's like anything, numbers don't lie. So, if you're in sports teams, you better be winning games too, right? If you win, then they want to know everything you're doing. If you're losing, everything you're doing is wrong. But we both know that's not exactly correct. So I look at the health of the athlete too. What's the status? Do you have the same players in the playoffs as you did the early season? Because things are, and we can talk football specifically, things are going to happen. Nothing's foolproof. But if you're getting a bunch of the soft tissue injuries again, that's usually more related. Now, it cannot just be the training, right? It can be the individual athlete, like back to their nutrition, their sleep, their recovery. They're doing more outside of what we're doing. There's so many factors that sometimes it is hard to pinpoint, but you can still take a broader lens, right? And you can look at things. And if it's consistent through a team, then there's probably a different issue. But to your point, they say 3 to 5 days. Typically, speed is the first thing to go, where, like your strength, you can retain longer. And if you're training speed once a week, you're maintaining at best, is usually what most people say. But a lot of people are scared of it, right? They think by doing max speed training in season, it's going to get a player hurt, but it's quite the opposite. By not doing it, and then their body's asked to do it in a game, they can actually get hurt. So hitting top speed is very safe. And again, even if it's just that 1 or 2 reps, like I said, we give them the 2 on Monday. Wednesday, we focus more on just acceleration. So just shorter distance, but we'll do different starts and then just more working on those first few steps. But you maintain that, it is a great measurement of the health, just like people use the force plates, or you can use your vertical jumps or your broad jumps, whatever. An athlete can't do those metrics and do those explosive things like sprinting and jumping if they're not recovered and healthy. And that's the one thing I love about it. And I think it's helped our guys and as team training is you can't fake it, right? You can't fake, I had 3 hours of sleep and I haven't ate all day and I'm going to go run 22.5 miles per hour. You just can't do it. So it kind of helps, indirectly, those other things, them to be more locked in and focused on what they're doing if they truly do want to be a great athlete or a better player or whatever it may be.
Well, that's obviously something we haven't even touched on is the want to. There's those athletes that are driven and will do everything you tell them, and then there's the ones that are there to kind of
Get a
be part of the team, and then there's the ones that are just they're a pain in the butt all the time.
Yeah.
Have you read Jerry Jones's book?
I have not.
He talks about when he was with the Cowboys, they went full speed, full scrimmage 3 times a week, and their injury rate went down, as opposed to people, everybody's half rack and no contact, and injury rates are going up. And I think that speaks to what you're saying. The body has to be accustomed to high intensity, full speed, or you're going to get hurt. It's not, that's one of those things that you hear it and it's like, yeah, that makes sense. But yet, we keep doing things that are counterintuitive to actual results. And
right.
That's why I think the speed thing is so important. Like I think the speed training keeps the body, understanding that high intensity, what that feels like. But I truly believe and not necessarily just football, but plyometrics keep our ACL injuries down because kids know where their bodies are in space. They know how to land. They know how to change direction. And then I think one of my NFL guys calls the weight room. That's where you get your body armor.
Right.
It all has to work together. I'm always glad to hear other coaches that are doing the same things. Number one, it's reassuring to me that I'm doing the right things. I see the results. I've seen them for a lot of years, but just hearing other coaches talk about the same concept it's such a reassuring thing to myself as a coach. So I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I know you're a busy guy. You got a lot of things going on, so I appreciate you getting on here quick. The way I finish all of my shows is with a speed round. Okay. So I'm going to
Okay.
put you under the gun here, and you got to answer fast. So I want short
Yeah.
answers, and I don't want you to think about them too long. You ready to
Okay.
roll?
Sure.
All right. Here we go. Squat or deadlift?
Deadlift.
Favorite cue in speed training?
Go up.
Most overrated lift?
Thinking too much. Probably bench press.
That answer. Resisted sprints or hill sprints?
Hill sprints.
Favorite warm-up drill?
Oh, there's so many. Sorry, I'm not being fast on that one. Forward and backward karaoke because it's entertaining sometimes. Yeah.
Biggest mistake you see in the weight room?
Rest intervals not being programmed appropriately.
Best advice you've ever received as a coach?
Just be yourself.
Favorite pre-workout snack?
Like peanut butter and banana.
Okay. Best barbecue in Nashville?
Oh, shoot. Martin's.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Well, I sure appreciate you coming on, and that was really, really good information. And if you and I can do something like this and reach one or two coaches that at least will look into it, then it was worthwhile. So I appreciate it. Hope the weather in Nashville gets better. Again, just really appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us.
I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for joining us today on Building the Athlete. Great conversation with Dan Quesenberry. Coaches in the Nashville area, speed-based football training. So the concept of getting away from the old school pound kids into the ground, focus on top end speed, 2 to 3 days a week. His results speak for themselves, higher performance, more wins, and even as important is injury rates drop because the body is consistently prepared for that high-end movement. Great conversation, great information. If you liked the content, please subscribe and follow us, Building the Athlete. You can check out our socials, Benson Sports Training, bensonsportstraining.com, and then you can catch us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We have lots of instructional videos and help videos out there. If you're interested in checking out our online program, you can reach out to us on any of those locations. Again, branded bills, best hat on the market, official hat of Building the Athlete and Benson Sports Training. There's a link in our bio for a 10% first-time buyer discount. Check that out. Until next time, we will see you again.